Ladies and gentlemen, we continue now with our next performer, and a very special change in plans here. We have a gentleman who is one of the foremost practitioners of his art form. I'll tell you what, there is no one else quite like this guy. And not only is he a fabulous performer, but he's also taken it one step further. I draw your attention to the table that is right in the center of the room here. This is the display of some of the strange and unusual things that he's brought in. Some of the things you can actually take home with you from his Freakatorium, his dive museum that he has in Lower Manhattan there, El Museo Loco. It is a capital of wonders, and it has amazing things in it. It has just great historic displays. If you believe in this form of entertainment, you gotta make a pilgrimage and see the Freakatorium. But you're in for a treat, because the guy who is behind that, and like I say, is just one of the best, is here tonight, and he's gonna do what he does so well. Get ready to have a great time. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the one and only Johnny Fox.
Thank you, thank you. Tom Robbins, what a pleasure. What a great honor to be here. Ward Hall, I can't believe I'm in the presence of Ward Hall, Red Trower, Red Stewart, all these amazing people who I've seen over the years. Keith Nelson from the Bindle Stiffs. Too many people here. George the Giant, all these great faces. Thanks for having me here. Franco, thank you. And yeah, so everything's been done. Lizard Man, I get to meet Lizard Man for the first time. Torture King, and all these people. I'm gonna forget a bunch of people. But anyways, you guys are all, hey, what a great treat. Yeah. Just swallow the fucking sword. No, I'm not doing that. You're gonna see that all weekend. How do you like the duds? I'll model the duds for you. My best friend with leather in New York City's custom leather. She moved to LA though. She's there now. Agatha. She's the best. My girlfriend, Valeria. Valeria, come here. I want you to meet my girlfriend, Valeria. Come on. Buenos Aires, Argentina. This is Buenos Aires, Argentina. We've been together almost 2 years now. Valeria used to street perform in New York. She won my heart because she was a street performer, dancing tango at the bottom of the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the 34th Street subway station, and a few others. We're putting an act together. We performed together a few times. I've got a great life, and I thank you. Thanks for coming up. Thank you. My girl. Come on in. Make yourselves comfortable. Sit down. It's like a living room show. Sit on the floor. And excuse me for swearing, kids. I'm sorry. I'm not really, but. Sit down, make yourself comfortable, move around. Yeah, move in. It's like a living room. It's going to be a 2-hour show. Make yourself comfortable. Anybody have a cigarette? Yeah. I don't smoke. I left mine. No. I mean, I'm going to need a cigarette in a while, and I know there's not too many people that smoke nowadays. Anyways, this one, also there's some, not too many, King of Swords hats. This is old stock. I haven't tried to sell this stuff in years. King of Swords hats, and there's a few King of Swords t-shirts. Silk screen, all nice silk screen. Oh, thank you. Me too. All right, I got the smoking book. All right. One is called a Snecka, and the other is a Jorum. Just swallow the sword. Oh yeah, and then a couple other little things we got to do. You're not going to go. Some of you people, you're just not going to look at the stuff close enough. We got these little sword swallower guys where you open them up, put little things in it. Little guy's got a bunch of swords in his mouth. And we have the only sword swallower birthday card I have ever seen. You open it up and it says throw up, and confetti pops out all over the place. Freakatorium is like a child to me. I moved to New York City about 8 years ago, and I was on 13th Street in the Lower East Side for a while. Then I moved to Brooklyn for a year, and I thought, well, what are you doing in Brooklyn? You may as well be in Buffalo. And so I had to be back in Manhattan, and all these people had, friends of mine had apartments, they were $1,500, and you walk up 3 or 4 flights of stairs, and you have a window that looks at somebody else's window, or a brick wall, if you have a window. And I thought, I see these gypsies living in storefronts around the city, and I thought, well, that's what I want. I want a storefront. And I'll have a door that opens onto the streets of Manhattan. So I lived in a storefront in a basement, and I had this collection of stuff that I've been collecting for over 20 years. I worked at the Medieval Festival in Sarasota for 21 years consecutively, and I also lived in Indian Rocks Beach, Florida. And my dad passed away down there in the mid-'70s. And I used to travel back and forth from Florida to New York City and study from an old magic master, Tony Slidini. I was very fortunate to have good teachers and very thankful for those blessings. And I knew sometime in my life I had to live in New York City. And as far as English-speaking theater, there's no other place like it. That's why Todd's there, right? Isn't that? And anyway, so I started living in this little sideshow museum, taking it apart and putting it back together, wanting everything to be, I'm a real stickler for details, I wanted everything to be really looking like Victorian, 1860, and started doing all this research on New York's history of dime museums and Charles Eisenman's studio over in the Bowery, and how there was about 7 or 8 dime museums where freaks were first exhibited. And Valeria came along and said, I want to see you keep going with this vision, and she's given me a lot of help since she came along. And we're really proud of the Freakatorium, and I somehow will get the website to show those photos of what it looks like inside, and we'll get that going so you can check that out. And is there a stand for this mic? I was thinking maybe I wouldn't even use a mic like this.
You guys can hear me okay without a mic? Yeah! So we don't even need this. Screws up the camera work? Ah, sorry. That's better. So I used to do a magic act in Florida in the 70s. I started off being a magic waiter. I used to wait tables and do magic tricks for the people after dinner. And then I moved from Florida out to Colorado into a place, Aspen, Snowmass, and I was working in a little restaurant there. I started street performing there in Aspen, and then brought it down to Boulder, Colorado after a couple seasons in Aspen, and then I wanted to travel around Europe, and when I was doing the magic act in Europe, I found the best way to gather a crowd at nighttime was to eat fire. Fire gathers a crowd, and I decided, well, this is fun and all, but I need something else to go along with the fire eating, and I thought about sword swallowing. And I remember as a kid, about 10 years old, I read a story about Houdini, how he swallowed a key on a string, and he practiced with a piece of potato that he cut into the shape of a key, and I remembered that. I also remembered swallowing spaghetti when I was about 10 years old. I remember looking at my brother across the table saying, look, nothing in the mouth. And Dad said, you're excused, you can leave the table now. And then I remember when I was about 16, 17, I got drunk with my friends and drinking too much scotch, and went over to the bushes and stuck my finger down my throat to get the alcohol out, and I remembered I could relax. So then years after, when I was eating the fire and doing the street magic, I thought, well, I could probably swallow a sword. I'm probably a shoo-in for that. I started working on the sword swallowing, and I started trying to research as much as I could with it. Found out about Dan Mannix, found out that he was still alive. Used to make little pilgrimages out to Fraser, Pennsylvania to sit and chat, and sit at the feet of Dan Mannix. If you don't know who he is, he wrote a book called Memoirs of a Sword Swallower, amongst many other things. He wrote The Fox and the Hound that he sold to Disney. He wrote we who are not as others. The list. I didn't throw it up. There's nothing attached to the coin either. There's no strings, threads, wires. It's the mystery of levitation. You know, 500 years ago, if I'd have done that, they'd have said, burn him, he's a witch. Today they just go, so what, just swallow the sword. Burn him, he's a witch. Excuse me. Glacio multivitamin water, distilled water. Best soft drink out there. Yeah, why not? Hey, how are you? Let's see. So this is a sword that I had from the early days, my early days in Boulder, Colorado. This sword's seen a lot. I used to have a little thing welded on here, and I used to have a little firework, and I used to have incense burning on the stage, and I'd stick the sword up there and then have a little incense fed through a little hole there, and used to light the fuse and let it was like a little bottle rocket, like a Roman candle, 2 shots at once, boom, and it would drop down. I used to have, at one point I had a little perch on the top of this. The perch was there at the same time that the little plate was there. And I used to have a parrot that would sit up there. A parrot would sit up there, and I used to say, this is for the parrot to sit on, this little plate down here, that's for the parrot to shit on. I'd let the parrot get up there, and I'd swallow the sword with the parrot on there. Yeah. Used to be the middle sword when I swallowed 3 swords at once. I haven't swallowed the sword in a long time. But people say, yeah, sword swallowing, it's a trick. The swords go into the handle. I mean, you guys in here, it's obvious, you know, it isn't a trick. For those of you who don't know, it's done through opening the esophagus up by opening the pharynx and the epiglottis, so the blade can be inserted into the esophagus. That's where it goes, the esophagus. It goes down a little bit deeper, it gets into the fallopian tubes. That's really scary. And it's always important to loosen up before you do this. At least that's what I tell them. This is a true story. I did that years ago on the streets, and it was in Boulder, Colorado. The way it happened was, I'd always do that in the show. And there's a guy named Avner the Eccentric, who was an old friend years ago. And he got it from someone else. Anyways, what happened was I was doing it, and the guy came up to me at the end of the show. He had his arm in his mouth for real. And it wasn't on either side of his face. His arm was in his mouth to the elbow. I'm not making this up. The guy had a $5 bill in his hand, his other hand. He was going to put it in the hat. And he was like, and it was right at the beginning of the hat pass. And he's like this, going, ooh, 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 to get my attention. I look and I go, holy shit. And I said, come on, man, take it out. And the guy pulls his arm out. He was an amputee. He had his arm cut off right there. I relate that story every show I do because it's one of those things you just cannot forget, and it's got a good visual to it. Just swallow the sword. Why? You're going to see a million people swallow the sword. Oh. Is anybody going to do this? Okay. I did it. I'll pay. Notice the length of the blade. See how far down that goes? Yeah. Take this off. Johnny Mia painted this sword board here. There's a little Mia down the bottom there, and the little soul patch says Mia. Another man who shouldn't be here, but one of the greats of all time. Don't forget Johnny Mia. It's a great thing this man's doing. Dan over here and his friend, they're putting this sword swallow thing together. I started reading his thing, and I was thinking there's sword swallowers out there who I think should be up there, who he's missed. And if there's others out there that you know about sword swallowers, tell them about them. One of the greatest sword swallowers I ever saw, who inspired me a bit when in the beginning was a guy named Rollick Montebank. His real name was Leo Greep. This man would swallow a little, he used to work with the Big John Strong Circus, if any of you may know him from there. He used to swallow a little Chris, little tiny Chris, and he'd let it go down and push it back up without his hands, and he'd take it and he'd throw it up in the air without looking, and you'd hear the blade, the handle rattling. Parents would grab their kids and yank their kids back. And he'd just look up and glance at the last second and go like that, and he'd grab it right there. And his hand never missed. One of the strongest things that he did, though, I'll never forget, he was doing the linking ring act. And he'd show the rings. Everybody's seen the linking rings, but this guy would show the linking rings. I also called himself Swami Amazo. Swami Amazo Ben Boda. He traveled all around through Mexico, through the little villages in Guatemala, putting on shows for the people down there. Didn't make very much money. He also, I think now he changed from performing into being an activist for the people in Guatemala and being like standing up for them down there, and very honorable thing to do. But he used to take two rings from the audience. He'd show his linking rings. He'd link them together. Then he'd show two rings that were separate, and he'd get a little 10-year-old boy up from the audience, and he'd say, "Look me in the eye. I'm putting these two rings separate into your hand. Imagine a bar of iron going down your arm. You will not be able to open your hand again until you hear me say the word now. Bar of iron, steel grip. You will not be able to open your hand again until I say that word." And then he'd go on linking the rings again over here, and he'd say to the kid, "Go ahead, open your hand." And the little kid would say, "I can't. And then he'd say to he'd look at the audience and go, "Ha ha ha ha! He can't open his hand. Now!" And the little boy would go boom, and he'd open his hand and the rings would be linked. If that's not strong magic, people shit. This guy was one of the greatest showmen I've ever seen. Where he is, who knows? Count Desmond, there's another one. I don't know if does anybody know if he's still alive?
I think so.
I'd love to find Count Desmond. I swallowed 16 swords years ago for a Showtime special with Jonathan Winters. It was an honor. It was probably one of the greatest honors in my career to be on a Showtime special with Jonathan Winters. The reason I swallowed 16 swords was because I thought the record should be right on sword swallowing, and Desmond was in the Guinness Book for years as swallowing 13 swords. I had a poster from Carmi. I have all the Carmi collection. I've held Carmi's props. I've done lots of research on Carmi. And I thought that Victorina, his wife, she swallowed 16 swords at once. She should be mentioned in the Guinness Book of Records, but they say 13. So I told him, I said, "Look, why don't we get, something out about this in the Guinness Book?" And I said, "I'm going to swallow 16 swords. You want to document it?" And I went from swallowing 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, until I got to the point where it was time to do the gig out in L.A., and I swallowed 16. But the Guinness people said, "No, we don't, the category's closed." The category's closed on sword swallowing. I said, "Well, why don't you take it out?" They said, "Well, don't tell us how to run our show, thank you." I said, "Okay, that's fair enough, but I'm still going to swallow 16 swords. And I think that we should give some recognition to Victorina. I'm not going to do 17. I'm not going to do one up, but I think give credit due where it should go." So they said, "No, we're not going to do that." So I said, "Okay, I swallowed 16 swords." And then a few years later, the Guinness record went down to 10 swords at once. And it was back in there with a new face, Brad Byers. All respect to Brad Byers. He's got a good, strong manager working for him out in Vegas. And I guess that's how he got it in there. But I've heard there's people that swallowed 20 swords over in Europe. Just swallow the sword, yeah. People say sword swallowers, the sword goes into the handle. Here. How about I swallow the handle? Thank you very much. It's very nice. I came up with this, swallowing this, and I started experimenting by putting an egg in there and frying the egg with a blowtorch while it was down my throat. That's right. The first time I did it for a friend who was an incredible artist, Joe Coleman. I did it at the opening of his show in Hartford, Connecticut, the Wadsworth Athenaeum. I grew up in Hartford, and I thought this is very fitting. 9/9/99 was the date. Then Joe and Whitney got married on 11/11/01 in Baltimore. And I swallowed a frying pan there and regurgitated eggs into the frying pan and cooked them up with 2 blow torches. The only thing Joe ate the day of his wedding was wedding cake that was cut from a sword that I had just swallowed. And I asked him if he wanted to eat the omelet after it came out of my throat, and he looked at me and said, "Johnny, you cook it up, I'll put it down." For those of you who don't know, Joe Coleman is he's a geek-loving freak from way back. If you don't know his work, check his work out. I'm in 2 of his paintings, if you can find them. Good luck. Yeah. Swallow the sword. Yeah. What about if I don't swallow a sword and I swallow other things? Because you're going to see lots of swords. This is a giant screwdriver. I found this. I was working with the Raspini brothers in Texas years ago. They were on the Jonathan Winter Show too. We were walking through a Mexican flea market in Houston. And one of them, Barry, picked it up and he said, "Hey, Johnny, you think you could swallow this?" And I said, "I don't know. Let's see it." And I put it down, and all these Mexicans just freaked out. They went, I said, "Hey, that's in the act." So I used to have people come up from the audience and let them pull the sword out, and I said, there's a lot of people doing that now. I used to take watches off people as they came out of the audience. There's a lot of people taking watches off people, so I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to bring anybody up to take the sword out or the screwdriver. What I'll do, though, just to disprove that it goes into the handle, what I do nowadays is I say, look, I'm going to take a bow a little bit deeper than my waist. While it's inside me, I'm going to take a bow. And the weight of it alone will force it to eject itself. I won't even touch the handle. But once it's all the way down, I'm going to twist the handle around a couple times like this clockwise. Because last show I think I did it counterclockwise and my butt almost fell off. So I'm just going to tighten it up. What would you do? It's okay. Stay. Started swallowing Chris's after about 4 years of swallowing swords. I was working in Renaissance festivals, and I thought, wow, it'd be cool to swallow a Chris, because maybe you could see the Adam's apple move from side to side. And of course, the Adam's apple is not like that from the sword. It's normal for anyone's Adam's apple to do that. You all have that flexibility as well. It's just that you've never checked. And if you look around now, sometimes you see people checking. It's one of those moments where the audience amuses me. I look out and see 5 or 10 of them. 5? 5 people checked? Yeah. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, it was fun to see fellow sword swallower Di Andrews showing how his Adam's apple wiggled. And he used to work at a game booth at the top of the hill of the stage that I used to perform at in Maryland for years. When he was a kid growing up, he used to watch my show. And years later, I saw him performing and doing some of these stunts out of my show, going, wow, I guess that's flattery, huh? Thanks for the flattery, Di. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I have to work this weekend. Well, how do you do it? 20 years of working at the Medieval Fair in Sarasota, Florida led me to go check out places like Gibsonton and look up greats like Ward Hall, Chris, who should be here too. Chris, what a great guy. Priscilla the Monkey Girl was alive back then, Grady Stiles, all those great people. And not that many. Work tomorrow, the next day, and the next day in Maryland. I'm working at a place called the Maryland Renaissance Festival. If you're down that way, look it up, stop by, say hi. If you're in New York, stop by the Freakatorium. Smoke rings? I used to smoke. I don't inhale anymore, if you watch. I mean, I quit. My lungs mean too much to me at my age, and my body doesn't heal as rapidly as it used to when I was a kid, and I figure if I get more oxygen, maybe it'll help me, so I don't care to inhale, but I still do the cigarette tricks. Smoke rings, I used to be the champ. Watch again, this time a square. I wish you people could see your faces looking for a square. Come on. Cigars work better. Melvin was a great guy to be around. He'd tell me stories. I'd ask him about places that he'd worked in his early days, Hubert's Museum, what it was like to be around Jack Johnson, the great boxer. And I'd ask him to tell me stories about other great sideshow performers that he had worked with and or he had known about. And there was one character that I was really curious to know more about, and his name was Randy, and they called him many things. Prince Randian, the armless, legless man, the living torso, the caterpillar man. Randy was a black man from Barbados, 2 gold earrings. He never wanted anybody to feel sorry for him. He got around fine. He had 5 kids and a wife, traveled the world. He made a good living. The greatest scene in the movie Freaks, who can't agree with this? In the rain, Randian with the knife in his teeth. He was the great. For me, he was the man. But he did his stunt. He would show how in the sideshow, he would show how he could hold a straight razor with a block of wood up against his shoulder, and he'd move his face up and down. He could shave himself. And he'd roll a cigarette using his mouth, creasing the paper with his chin, and then shaking tobacco into the paper, and then he'd roll the cigarette and talk about his travels and his wife. And when the cigarette got small, he performed this little stunt. The cigarette's still burning. Eh? I'm all right. Look. Here. I'm all right. I got it. Look. So, let's see, what other things for swallowing that aren't swords? Giant hemostats for really lazy potheads. Giant scissors for really lazy potheads. Yeah, but they weren't open. Yeah. Anyways, there's so many greats here. It's kind of hard. I mean, it's not hard, but it's kind of, it feels a little funny swallowing swords with all these great sword swallowers like Red Trower and Red Stewart out there. Red Trower, this man, I can't believe. This man, if you don't know who he is, you don't get a chance to talk to anybody else here. Talk to Red Trower. This man is one of the greats. I made a pilgrimage to his place in Houston, Texas. I'm so glad you're here. Red Trower, man. Give that man a hand. man, he used to swallow a rifle. Ward Hall will tell the story. Tell him, you got to tell him before the weekend's over. I'm not going to be here. I'm out of here tonight. But that man is full of stories that are unbelievable. And it's a pleasure being here. You guys enjoy yourself, and I wish I could be the whole weekend with you. Thank you very much.
Do not worship him. He is only a man, Johnny Fox, ladies and gentlemen. Once again. Check out all the great stuff that Johnny's got on his table right over here, because there's fabulous stuff and also flyers from the Freakatorium.